Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to the second official episode of the Yak Chat, where we talk all things kayaks, all things fishing, all the time. We're streaming live on YouTube and Facebook, so wherever you are watching, thank you. We appreciate it. We're also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify as well. So if you're listening later on at the gym, on your way to work, wherever it is, thank you. Make sure if you're watching live that you guys like this video. It helps us shoot up in the algorithm and make it more searchable. Same thing with the podcast platform. So if you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. It would really help us out and gets us a little bit more higher ranked. So today we have a very special episode. We're talking to Trevor Low of Omnia Fishing, and we will be talking about a lot of things, but amongst those things will be reels, not Instagram reels, but spinning reels, fishing reels, bait casting reels, gear ratios, and all that fun stuff, man, because it can get super overwhelming. I could tell you right off the rip, I don't understand all that stuff. So I'm hoping to get an education just as much as sharing information with y'all. And make sure, like always, that this is an interactive show. So make sure you guys drop a comment, ask questions, let us know what you got. If you got some smart remarks, we welcome it. We love sarcastic comments. Makes us laugh. And make sure you listen to the very end because we will have the funny or crummy segment. So send in your dad jokes because at the very end, we're going to be going through them and deciding whether they were funny or crummy. And don't get your feelings hurt if they were crummy. It's okay because it's a dad joke. So really, it's a win-win at the end of it. Doesn't matter. First things with some housekeeping before I bring the guys on is if you're not part of, let me put on here real quick. If you're not part of Kayak Fishing Dads on Facebook, make sure you get on over there and join the conversation. We got a community on Facebook with more than 16,000 guys there. These are anglers, beginner anglers, expert level, if you want to call them that, anglers, like everybody on there sharing videos, sharing pictures, sharing setups, asking questions, answering questions, all types of stuff, man. And it's a really good, solid group of guys. So if you're not on Facebook, get on Facebook and then get on Kayak Fishing Dad's Facebook group. So you'll love it, especially if you're a beginner angler. You get on there, look at what everyone else is doing, look at the setups that everyone has, all that stuff. Something really cool that we're doing for Kayak Fishing Dads just starting this season is we're doing some regional meetups. And what this is, it's essentially just getting together and fishing with other kayak dads from your area. And no, you don't have to be a kayak dad. You could be a kayak granddad. You could be a kayak future dad, whatever. The point is that we love kayak fishing. We love to get out there. So the whole point of these regional meetups, again, is just to meet other guys in your area that you might not otherwise meet, which is a really cool thing to do. You could bring some friends along with you, bring your kids if they're old enough to get on a kayak. And it's just a low-key event designed to get guys on the water and meeting other anglers. That's as simple as that. Like, that's all it is. We have 4 dates so far set up for the regional meetups for Kayak Fishing Dads. We have April 13th in Lake Murray, South Carolina. We have May 11th on Lake Nakamixon in Pennsylvania. And also on May 11th in Southwest Indiana, we got, I think it's on Bluegrass Fish and Wildlife Association or whatever. It's a lake in Southwest Indiana on May 11th. So the same day. And then we also have a brand new one, which I'm going to get the event on Facebook, is June 8th in Lake Singletary, Massachusetts, for you New England fans out there. Make sure you guys join it. Even if you're Patriots fans, we still love you, I guess. And if you guys want to host one of these, anytime throughout the season, send me a message on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, whatever it is. Just get a hold of me. We're looking for people to host some of these regional meetups wherever you're at. So if you're in Texas, you're in California, shoot, if you're in another country and you think you can get a couple of the guys out there, that's cool, man. We just want to get together and just meet other anglers and have a good time. And lastly, before I bring on the guys, make sure you guys mark your calendar. The next episode of the Yak Chat is on March 17th. Sunday, March 17th, 8 o'clock, same place. And we're talking with the Bearded Paddler. And this guy has got a wealth of knowledge. He actually comes from a background in kayak retail, I guess if you want to call it that. He manages one of the largest kayak retailers in the United States. He's in the Ozark Lake area. And we're talking about the worst kayaks. All right. So a lot of this information, you'll see videos oh, the best kayaks under $1,000, the best kayak for big dudes. No, this is straight up the worst kayaks. So if you got really bad kayak stories, make sure you send them in and make sure you tune in. We're talking with the bearded paddler about just the worst kayaks, which will be a lot of fun. So enough about that. Let me bring the guys on here. We got Lucas from the Outdoor Conquest. We got Bryan, the Michigan fisherman. We got Juan, Captain Hooks. And of course, we got Trevor Low, our special guest for today. Thank you guys for joining us and being here. Trevor, thank you for joining this band of shenanigans right here too.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm been looking forward to this. It's going to be a super good show for sure.
Yeah, no, we're excited. And ever since you and I started talking about doing this, I got really excited. And you and I have worked together a little bit, and Lucas as well. You and Lucas, we worked on a campaign for Omnia Fishing, which we'll get into a little bit about Omnia. But no, we're happy to have you and your wealth of knowledge here. But before we get into like the questions on the reels and all that, though, because everybody that's watching, for the most part, knows our story. Lucas, Juan, Bryan, myself, about how we got into fishing. So can you let us know kind of what started your fishing journey, why you continue to fish, and what got you into competitive fishing?
Yeah. Similar to a lot of people, my story kind of revolves around my dad introducing me when I was a kid. Started out crappie fishing, panfish, that sort of thing. And obviously, as you get older, you kind of move on to bass fishing. So started bass fishing and just fell in love with it. Obviously, the whole, the fight of the bass and just the different techniques and tactics to try to catch them. And then as I got older and continued to progress, then it turned into the tournament side of things where you could actually compete and do that. And, watching like the Bass Masters and all those guys and that sort of stuff is what really drew me into it. But yeah, so did that. So decided to, obviously when you go to college, try to make your college choices based off of your major, but I was more focused on which college teams were good and which ones weren't good. And I ended up staying here in home, which is Minnesota, went to the University of Minnesota and ended up winning the entire Bassmaster College Series the first year I fished it. So that was pretty amazing, kind of just catapulted me into the industry. And just stayed in since. I'm currently with Omnia. So if you're unfamiliar, we are a online fishing tackle retailer. But I think the founders see it more of a technology company than anything else because we take a lot of information from fishing reports, so we can personalize product recommendations to you based off of the lake that you're fishing, the species that you're targeting. And now we've got this new app that, basically takes a bunch of different map features such as contours, weather, and everything like that, and puts it all together and makes everything very easily accessible for anglers all in one spot. So, yeah.
Okay. That's awesome. That's cool. Cause I was going to ask you kind of what got you into working with Omnia, but also with Omnia, there's a lot of tackle retailers, if you will, whether online or brick and mortar. So, so you kind of answered the question a little bit, but what separates Omnia from, say, the other competitors in a similar space?
Yeah, I think, like I said, a lot of it comes from the wealth of knowledge. We are seeing a trend moving towards e-commerce now in this day and age. Obviously, you look at like Amazon and all these other mega, websites where everybody's buying stuff. And what we're trying to accomplish here is to be able to give you that in-store experience, going to, let's just say, a Bass Pro or something like that, where sometimes when you go in and you're like, hey, I'm going to go fish this body of water. I've never been there before. And you go and talk to the guy in the department. And, half the time, chances are this person is just filling in for the guy who called in to go fishing in the fishing department. And he's from the clothing department. So he doesn't really know a whole lot of what he's talking about. And so what we like to do is we like to get information from local anglers in those regions where they really know what they're talking about. They understand the fisheries that they're fishing, and we collect fishing reports from them so that when they're out there fishing, they can say, hey, I was fishing on Lake Table Rock or something like that. I caught him throwing a red rattle trap in 15 foot of water targeting riprap or something. And so when these fishing reports come in, we take all this. We have basically a computer scientist that works at Omnia who can churn all this information and put it into basically our flywheel, machine learning and everything like that, so that when somebody does go and visit the Table Rock page on our website and they want to figure out how do you catch spotted bass on Table Rock in the fall, you can input those 3 filters, and we've got fishing reports and all the different product recommendations, so you have a guideline of which direction you need to go.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. And I got a chance to play with a little bit of the Omnia, the Premium Pro subscription. So was that your brainchild? Is that something you guys came with? It hasn't been on the market terribly long, right?
Yeah, that's correct. So like I said, the founder's vision is to have this as a technology company first and foremost. And we're venture funded, so obviously investors help keep the company going and everything like that. And they wanted to branch out into that app subscription space. So we figured, how do we get anglers excited about purchasing an app and so on and so forth. And obviously everybody has Navionics on their phone that fishes. So we said, okay, let's go get Navionics. Let's put it into our phone. What else do we use as anglers? Weather is another thing. So we put wind, we put radar, we put storm cells, lightning, all that sort of stuff to keep you safe on the water. And then we also source third-party data to get really cool mapping features such as water temperature, water clarity, so that, especially for kayak anglers, you can't run across the lake, 70 miles an hour like bass boats can. So it's super helpful to know, like, if I'm looking for dirty water, I can pull up this map layer and say, hey, this creek arm over here on the south end has clean water or dirty water. I'm going to go fish that. Or if you're looking for warmer water, you can figure out which creeks have warming water based off of satellite readings. So helps you kind of break down your practice more efficiently and gives you just as much time on the water to be as successful as you can.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. I used it over in Lake Gunnersville when I was down there in November. And it's wild the amount of information it has on there. And I know Lucas has used it too on St. Clair, right?
St. Clair, and as of recently, so I used it during ice fishing season to locate. So I do pike spearing a lot in the wintertime, and I used it to locate what I thought would be a good corridor for pike to travel in the wintertime. It was kind of a funnel, and the Omnia Fishing app shows you where the weed beds are, and it gives you a pretty good idea anyways to put you where you want to be and what you're looking for. So I used that and carved a spear hole and had multiple pike come through, bass, speared a big pike. But on top of that, I went back to that spot after ice out. What was this, 3 or 4 days ago, and caught my personal best open water northern pike exactly from the spot where I carved that spear hole, which was, and I specifically went to that spot because I knew if the pike were there under the ice that they were there for a reason. So there's bait fish, there's something there for them besides the weed beds and the fact that it's like a travel corridor and a little bottleneck right there. But I caught them on a Bill Lewis jerkbait. I didn't get a measurement, but I'm guessing between 38 and 40 inches. It's on my Facebook page. I don't know if you can pull it up or not. I know I can't share it, but just a unit of a northern pike. So that was cool. But yeah, it's definitely user friendly, to say the least. It's really easy to navigate, to go through the different layers that it offers. And I especially like it for lakes I've never been to and ice fishing, because when there's ice on the lake, if you didn't do any scouting, when it was open water, it really helps you find, for a pike fisherman for sure, it helps you find those weed beds that you're looking for.
Yeah. Yeah, that's dope, man. Cool. Yeah, well, if you guys are interested in getting that, downloading it, it's just Omnia Fishing, right? The Omnia Fishing app, and then the Premium Pro subscription is just $50 a year too, which is a steal. I mean, you're talking about apps that, a lot of these subscription apps might be like $20 a month. This is $50 a year, so it really is a good deal. And like Trevor Wagner dropped a comment, he said, "Don't forget the app lets you shop instantly, so wallet gets a little lighter." But it is helpful because you could search like right on the spot, and even like you can search by technique or the type of water. When you're looking at the reports that are on there, you could search the lure that the person put on there that they caught the fish, right?
Yeah, it especially in those fishing reports, obviously, take everything with a grain of salt. Not everybody's going to share, down to the exact detail, but it kind of puts you in a direction that you should be heading in terms of, bait selection and that sort of thing. And just one more point on that pricing, like you said, $49 a year, $50 a year. But with that, you also get 10% back on all your purchases. So if you spend, X amount of dollars on tackle, you potentially end up getting it for free after you get all that tackle credit. And a lot of the times we do like rebates as well. So just keep an eye out for that. Wink, wink.
Cool.
All right, cool. That's
up.
awesome. Yo, Juan, you were going to ask something?
No, I said that's cool. That's what's up.
Yeah.
As far as
No, I didn't know about that 10% off. That's pretty
10%
dope.
off. Yeah, that's kind of a real good incentive.
Yeah, so it's 10% back on your purchases, and then obviously when we have sales, if it's like a 15% sale, then you get 10% back. It's like 25% off, and it's free shipping on all your orders as well. So it just makes a lot of sense.
That's what's up. I mean, where's the redirect as far as like purchasables? What is it? Can I get anywhere? Can I get to my favorite site potentially, or?
Ask that question again. I didn't quite understand.
So all right. So you mentioned being able to make purchases, right?
Yep.
So are these purchases made through Omnia, or are you sending us to like a website, like one of my favorite websites?
Yeah. So we have our own, warehouse. So we house over like 26,000 different SKUs. So basically any big manufacturer, vendor that you can think of, Shimano, Daiwa, Loomis, Megabass, Strike King, blah, blah, blah. We carry it all. And
okay.
The app lets you purchase straight from there. We make it super easy. Everything's all in one spot.
Okay, cool. So like, for instance, if I'm using the app and I get to a particular location and I have something kind of similar to what's suggested, but not the exact thing, and I look and I say, oh, look, there's a little sale on it. I, as a user, can go ahead and right through there, click and purchase that said right through you guys.
Yep, absolutely.
Cool. Wow, awesome.
Yeah. And there's a question from Average Dad Fishing. He said, does this app do all the same things for rivers?
Yeah, it's like I said, with Navionics, so we just got Navionics integrated into the app. So everything that you have on Navionics, we have on the app as well, all the way up to 1 foot detail contours. In terms of the vegetation, the bottom hardness layers, all of that is derived from CMAP. If you're familiar with that, it's essentially social mapping. So if I were to take my boat out and go and scan and, record my sonar logs, and then I upload it into a cloud using Lowrance. So once all that stuff gets uploaded into the cloud, then it gets put into our app as well. So CMAP is more detailed, I would say, than Navionics for the areas that it does cover, but the coverage is not comprehensive. So all that to say, to answer the question on rivers, yes, if Navionics coverage is on that river, we will have it. But chances are the CMAP coverage won't be on there. Water temperature, water clarity, all that is going to be satellite derived. And, sometimes you miss certain areas of lakes because of cloud cover. So satellites can't see through the clouds. Then it's not going to pick up a temperature reading. So that might be off by a couple days or so, or water clarity could be off as well. So kind of, it's not a end all be all, but it definitely helps kind of put you in the right direction.
Yeah.
Could it tell you if a lake is frozen with ice or not?
I don't know if we're to that point yet with our satellite readings. That is something that we are trying to figure out how to get to that point. Obviously, a lot of us being up here in Minnesota, we want to know when ice out is. So that is something that's hopefully going to get integrated soon. And yeah, we've got tons of new stuff that's coming out. We just launched like waypoints, so you can add waypoints into your map as well, and save all that stuff. And the really cool feature about that is it pairs with all this map and weather data. So let's just say you are fishing. So this is not integrated yet, but this is hoped for the future. Of what we can do with these waypoints is, if you're out there fishing, you catch a 4-pounder on a lake during practice, save a waypoint. It's going to keep all those pieces of information: water temperature, water clarity level, wind direction, wind speed, temperature, air temperature, all that sort of stuff. So when you go and drop waypoints all over the lake during practice, and then you find out during the tournament it's a north wind at 15 miles an hour, you can go and kind of filter through all those catches that you had and see where fish were biting based on the wind, based on the air temperature, based on various conditions. So just a lot of helpful information to help you be more efficient on the water when you're out there.
Cool.
Yeah. Cool. No, that's good information to know, man. So you guys check it out, Omnia Fishing app. So let's jump into the main conversation for the night. Then we're gonna talk about some reels. So for me, that was always something that took a long time for me to kind of get my head around. And I still, like, full transparency, I know enough to get by for my reel selection, but not enough to feel confident explaining to someone why they should go with this or that. Right. And I feel like me and Bryan are probably on the same page because we had the same discussion a couple of weeks ago. Enough to survive, right?
Basically, yeah. I know very little. I mainly use spinning reels because I can throw. I know there are some baits that you should be throwing on a bait caster, but I've thrown pretty much everything you can throw on a spinning reel. So when it comes to bait casters, I'm not gonna lie. Like Jay said, I'm pretty green. I've owned a couple, but I don't really know what I'm doing as much as I probably should.
Yeah. No, and that's cool. That's why I'm glad you're here. That's why I'm glad I'm here, because I want to be educated too. So I guess, like, let's start basic 101. What are the main types of fishing reels for freshwater fishing, and how do they differ then in terms of functionality and use?
So I take it these questions are directed at me. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you guys, and I'll say it too,
please,
everyone can chime in and jump in.
Yep, everybody chime in. I don't want to act like I'm the fountain of knowledge here, because I have so much more to learn, obviously, with fishing as well. But to answer that, obviously, bait casting and spinning gear is generally the two staples when you're talking freshwater fishing. When you move up towards big game, pike, muskies, paddlefish, all that sort of stuff, you can get into like line counters where there's like a little, I don't even know how to say it, but it's like a little number meter thing that kind of tells you how much line has been fed out of your reel. But for the most part, if we're bass fishing or walleye fishing, it's bait casters and spinning rods, and you're starting to see, generally speaking, the heavier tackle is going to be thrown on a bait caster. Your lighter finesse stuff is going to be thrown on a spinning rod. But you are starting to see this trend where guys are using what's called BFS, which is bait finesse. So it's bait casting reels to cast, super tiny finesse lures, almost like crappie size lures. Me personally, I'm not a huge fan of the bait finesse hype train, because I feel that a bait caster does not have as smooth as a drag that a spinning reel does. So if I'm throwing really light line, light wire hooks, I want to have as smooth of a drag with a spinning reel, rather than trying to thumb my drag and open the spool and control my line let out with my thumb. So that's just kind of my 2 cents on that whole thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I know Lucas wanted to bring up the BFS because we had questions about that too. So I don't know if we want to push it to later or not, but there's a lot of questions on BFS because we had this whole conversation, maybe like less than a couple, maybe 6 months ago, right, Lucas? Because that's when BFS was like popping and everyone's like trying to jump on the train.
Yeah. So, and for me, I'll be straight up. I just think it's a scam. I don't know what you're gaining out of it. You know what I mean? Like, I think I know that's not legit, but that's just like my opinion when I look at it as a whole. If I'm throwing something finesse, wacky rig, Ned rig, anything super lightweight, the hover rig, doing stuff like that, spinning reel in my hand is what I want. I don't see, even if I was trying to make a more accurate cast, I don't know how I would achieve that with a tiny little bait caster reel. And that's just me. Now, I've never used one. I was hoping Trevor could, I was kind of hoping he would be able to convince me to buy one, but it sounds like he's not sold on it either. So I'm just like, because honestly, and I love my bait casters. I use them for jerk baits, crank baits, stuff like that. But outside of that, I'm using all spinning reels for almost everything I'm using, and especially for smallmouthing. I mean, today I threw the bait caster around a little bit, but not a lot. Everything else was pretty much finesse, light jig head with spark shad on there and just drag it around the rock piles.
That's my jam.
Yeah. So and again, I don't understand. I guess I don't understand the BFS. I know a lot of people It became really popular, and it seems like it's dying out a little bit. But I don't understand unless guys are just like, I have to throw a bait caster. That's the type of fisherman I am. But I feel like you're losing leverage. You're losing fight against the fish. That's one thing I like about a spinning reel is that, especially smallmouth fishing, you can wear them out a lot better than you can with a bait caster.
Yeah. And I feel like you have a smoother, I feel like, when you're working like a small kayak or something like that, I feel like you just have a smoother, you have smoother control over that retrieve over the bait cast. Cause I've, in using both and trying to use both, I know guys, depending on how big you get on the swim baits, they'll go to the bait caster or whatnot. But, like even me, I'm a guy who I throw a jerk bait on a spinning reel. So, top water, like a dog walker, I'll throw that on a spinning reel too. It's just something about that. It's just something about it that for me, I'm able to control that a lot more. So, yeah, I don't know. In a lot of weird aspects, I keep a spinning reel for that, but I feel like I have more control. I have more control over the speed, the tension, letting that, tightening I can't speak for some reason today, tightening my tension, loosening it up or whatnot, and just having better leverage over my fish than I do with the bait caster at times. With the bait caster, sometimes I feel like I'm caught off guard when I catch a fish. So yeah, even down south doing a Texas rig, I'll use a bait caster as well. Not a bait caster, a spinning reel. And that's because as soon as I see that bite happen or I feel that bite, it's easier for me to just flip open my bail and let that line run out and let him take it for a second, then close up and set up. You know what I mean? So I don't know. And I guess I could do the same thing, just open up the bail on a bait caster. I guess I could do the same thing, but I don't know. That's just me. Everybody has their preferences, but yeah, out of using both for sure, I like the spinning rod.
I don't know. For me, like the first thing I think about is I like to fish docks. So any chance I get to throw something under a dock, like a spinning rod or spinning reel is going to be a lot more forgiving. I backlash the crap out of my bait casters. Anytime I try to skip under or even like get remotely close to skipping, I just can't nail it right. But a spinning rod, I mean, you could bang into all the pontoons you want or whatever it is. It's super forgiving.
That's true as far as the backlash. I didn't consider that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I think skipping docks, skipping laydowns with a spinning rod is definitely the way to go. I think one of the things that I've noticed is kind of a hassle with spinning gear is line twist as well as wind knots. So you will get that, especially using. So when I'm throwing a spinning rod, I have a braided main line to a fluorocarbon leader. But wind knots are probably the biggest thing that you run into. You're not going to run into line twist as much with braided main line. But yeah, I would say that's probably the only downside to spinning rods. And if you even watch, like the Elite Series this past week, I mean, guys that are, obviously everybody's talking about forward-facing sonar and everybody hates forward-facing sonar, but these guys, I mean, they're catching 10-pounders using spinning rods now too, just because to Juan's point, you have that, accuracy with your casts, you can finesse that bait and you can shake it in place a lot easier, it seems like, with a spinning rod than a bait caster, and just working something very, very, slowly in the strike zone in the middle of the water column. You're seeing a ton of guys do that more with a spinning rod than they are with a bait casting rod.
Yeah. It's something about the mechanics of it. I feel like, with that hangover and because you could work it so many different ways, and you could keep your retrieve the same and just lift your rod tip up and create these, I don't know. It's just, I don't know. It's just the way to go for certain things, for sure.
So with a bait caster, I feel like, today, I'm going to touch on a couple things. When I use a bait caster, like for a crankbait, I feel like I can really dial in my retrieve. Whether I want it right on the bottom, just digging in the rocks and gravel, or mid column. But I can dial it in. I can crank it real slow, and it's really controlled as far as your retrieve. And if I really want to bomb a lure, Like if I want to send something to the moon, I'm throwing it on the bait caster, and a lot of times that's a crankbait or a jerk bait or I mean, what else do I throw on? That's pretty much all I throw on that thing. Or like, so I musky fish too, right? So I got great big Abu Garcia bait casters, and I mean, I give everything I got and launch giant lures. But I couldn't imagine chucking a musky lure with a spinning rod or a spinning reel. But one thing I want to touch on was today. So it was super windy. I was on Lake St. Clair. Was throwing the bait caster, ended up exploding into a backlash because I was casting into the wind. I messed with my brake a little bit, and I my next cast, because I wanted to get a little more distance. I was spot locked, and I wanted to get a little more distance into the wind. And the very next cast completely exploded into a backlash. And then 2 out of my 4 spinning rods had the nastiest wind knots I've ever dealt with. And I honestly, I don't know what's worse, if it's a wind knot. I think a wind knot is worse than a backlash because I can get a backlash out. But a wind knot, like, I mean, I'll end up pulling all the line off the spool before I get it fixed. So
wind knots take you off guard.
Oh, wind knots are just they're terrible, and I don't know what causes them. I mean, other than the twist in the line, but can those be caused by either? I don't know, Trevor, maybe you can answer this or not, but can you over spool your spinning rod or your spinning reel? I know you can under spool it, but is there such thing as over spooling it to cause a wind knot?
Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely over spool it. I don't know if that necessarily causes the wind knots. I know from just my experience, you talk Lake St. Clair, we have Mille Lacs here. So big open bodies of water, no protection from the wind. And when I take clients out on guide trips, that's the most common thing that I run into. And most of the time it's caused because of, when you make a long cast, let's just say you're casting and you've got a crosswind, there's a big bow in the line, right? And what happens is they don't tighten up their line before they start reeling. So they start reeling with this huge bow in their line between the first guide and your spool. And what that does is it's like reeling in loose slack line. And for the most part, when you do that, that's when you're going to run into that wind knot issue. But one thing I learned from a good friend of mine, his name is Matt Steffen. He's got an awesome YouTube channel. He fishes the Bass Pro Tour. The simplest way to get these wind knots out, because Lucas, to your point, you're ending up pulling out your entire spool line. What you can do is if you can untwist. So usually there's 3 strands that come up with a wind knot. So you got your main line, and then you got this other double strand that like wraps around your main line. And it's the worst thing. If you can get that double strand loop out of your main line, all you have to do is loosen up your drag all the way and just start peeling line through your drag. And I
tried that today. But I skipped that first step. I skipped the first step because I was like, because I remember seeing that video and I was like, here we go. My first wind knot of the year. So I loosened my drag and I'm starting to pull on it. And I'm like, man, this ain't working. But I guess I didn't unwind the loop.
Yeah.
Because I even called my buddy afterwards. I'm like, you remember the video I sent you of Matt Steffen and getting the wind knot out? I said, yeah, it didn't work. I tried it, but I skipped a step.
Yeah. I definitely, it was just through trial and error. Like I was peeling and peeling without untwisting it off the main line. And once I untwisted it off the main line and you kind of hold it with your rod on the other, with the one hand, and then you're peeling with your right hand or whatever it is, that generally makes it come out a lot easier.
Okay. So I've got a couple I'm going to work on, and I don't know if it's too late or not, but I'm going to peel the line off and get down to the knot and then try it and see if I can get it right. Yeah. Probably not, though. I think I made the situation a lot worse than what it was.
It's usually how it goes.
Yeah.
All right. So we talked about BFS. Can you explain, Trevor, the importance of gear ratio? Because I still don't know about this. What's the importance of gear ratio when it comes to fishing reels and how it impacts certain techniques? Yeah.
So with gear ratios, obviously, I guess the easiest way to translate it is if you think about riding a bike. If you're going uphill, if the gears on your bike are set too high, you're going to be working super hard just to try to turn those wheels as you're going up the hill, and it's just going to fatigue you. You're not even going to be able to step on the pedal. So then you start gearing down. You shift that gear and the bike down, and you're going to be pedaling like crazy, but it's going to make it so that that wheel is easier to turn and you can actually climb up that hill. And so similarly with gears with a reel, you know, when you're throwing a bait like a crankbait, a super deep diving crankbait, if you've got a gear ratio that's high, like a 7 or an 8 or even a 9, you know, when one turn of that handle, you know, that lure is coming in 42 to 45 inches of line, you know, and if you've got a 20-foot diver that's coming in that fast, you're just going to torque your hand like crazy, you know, and it's going to be very difficult. You're going to wind it and you're going to wind it. And yeah, you could really slow down, you know, your retrieve and go like extremely slow. But most of us, generally speaking, when we're reeling, we just have a steady cadence when we're reeling moving baits, chatter baits, you know, crank baits, anything of the sort, spinner bait. So when you lower your gear ratio, it slows down that retrieve so it doesn't feel like you're fatiguing yourself like crazy when you're reeling in, especially deep diving crankbaits, big spinner baits with like a big Colorado blade that's thumping super hard. So a lot of it is for fatigue. And then obviously the other reason is to pick up line. So you want fast gear ratio to pick up line. If you're, I tell people all the time, you know, the way I keep it pretty simple, I use a 6 gear ratio or I use an 8 gear ratio. 7s are all in betweens, whatever, you know, that's great and all. But if I'm going to be moving the bait by reeling, I'm throwing a 6 because I can, if I need to speed it up to pick up some line and set the hook, I can do that. But it's harder for me to slow down because that's just how I'm wired. So if I'm using a bait that's going to be moving by me turning the handle, spinner bait, chatter bait, crank bait, anything else that you can think of that you're winding, I want something that I can just keep a steady, consistent cadence and I'm not wearing myself out. If I'm going to be using a lure that I move by pulling my rod, Texas rig, frog, jig, Carolina rig, something of the sort. So if I pull my rod and I move it 2 feet and then I need to wind up to pick up the slack so I can move it again, when that fish bites, 9 out of 10 times they bite when you pause it. And so what happens there is you want to pick up that slack as fast as you can so that you get tension and you can set that hook. So I try to keep it pretty simple. You know, some people are like, well, you need an in-between if you want to, you know, if you have an all-purpose rod where you're going to be throwing a chatterbait and then you're going to cut that off and you're going to tie on a Carolina rig or something like that. But, you know, if in the best case scenario, you have a rod for a chatterbait, you have a rod for a Carolina rig. But obviously everybody doesn't have the ability to do that. So 7s are good in betweens if you are able to, you know, slow down your cadence on your retrieve or speed it up.
Okay. I never heard that before. That's good information. If you're moving the bait with your rod, you go higher.
Correct. You're just picking up line.
Cool. It's a good way to look at that.
Yeah.
And if you're using something like that, you just want. So is that lower gear ratio? Does that give you more torque?
It does. Yep. Yeah, it gives you more torque. And like I said, it's less fatigue on your hand. Trust me, the next time you go out, if you have a super high gear ratio reel, if you throw a super deep diving crankbait, you know, with a turn of the handle, it's just gonna be yanking your rod down because you're like, man, this thing is just diving and digging so fast that, you know, you need to end up just like crawling it with your hand just to get it to run carefully or run true.
Got you. Now, do you notice any benefit to using longer or shorter rods depending on gear ratios?
I don't think it's necessarily tied to gear ratios. I think it's more tied to the bait that you're throwing. You know, longer rods are going to be hopefully a little more whippy. So, for example, if you have 2 rods that are the same power, let's just say medium power, if you have one that is 7'6" and you have one that is 6'10", the 7'6" is going to be a little bit whippier, and you're going to be able to launch baits a little bit better. So, for example, like a crankbait, you're going to want to kind of load up that rod on that cast. So that's going to be a little bit better. You're going to get a longer casting distance compared to a 6'10". You know, it's not going to have that loading power and that whip. So you're not going to get as much casting distance out of it. But I think it's more technique specific than it is gear ratio specific.
Okay.
You know, and so the gear ratio, the amount of line it picks up, it changes if it's a bigger reel, right? So like a 6.2 to 1 on a smaller reel is going to be different than a 6.2 to 1 on a larger reel.
That I don't know.
Because I came across this issue when I was looking at a bigger reel for like the bigger swim baits,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't decide what gear ratio I wanted because I was hearing mixed type of information, and that was one of the things I was hearing, that it's actually a lot faster because the take up is a lot more on those bigger reels.
Yeah, I mean that could make sense. I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah, I guess I would have to compare. Let's just say you pull a Daiwa Tatula, a Tatula 100 compared to Tatula 200, and just look at both 6.3 to 1s and see if the gear pickup is the same. My guess is that the frame is going to be bigger, the spool is going to be bigger, but the gearing potentially would be the same.
Okay.
Or at least the gearing inside is going to be, I guess, bigger in proportion with the frame. So the ratio or the amount of pickup per turn should be the same, but I don't know off the top of my head for sure.
Okay. And we had someone ask on Facebook, does line size matter when it comes to gear ratios?
Yeah. Gear ratios, like I said, I think that's more technique specific. Line size also kind of technique specific. I think they're independent of each other, but 100% line size matters. When you're fishing, you're going to get more bites with lighter line. It's more natural. It allows the bait to move more naturally with the current. It's obviously less visible, but you have to be more finesse about it, and you got to let those fish run. So depending on the situation that you're in, if you can get away with straight braid, great, but if you've got to throw fluorocarbon, if you have to go light line, especially in clear water for smallmouth, you're going to find that, generally speaking, if it's clear water, they will be more line shy if they can see the line. So line size absolutely matters.
Cool.
I got a question. When when one is going about building themselves a combo, you guys might be used to going out and just buying their combos already set up, and then they get to a point where they kind of graduate to that next level, and they want to build their first rod. When they go about doing that, where should they be starting? Should they be starting from the rod? Should they be starting from the reel? Or should they be thinking about the lures that they want to throw with it?
Yeah, I think if it were me, and like I said, this is just my opinion, I think the rod matters more than the reel, especially if it's a bait caster. If it's a spinning rod and a spinning reel, I think I'd be more picky, especially because of, we were talking about having a good drag system on the rod or the reel, having it cast nice and smooth and that sort of stuff. That's kind of the way I would lean. If it's a bait casting setup, I would focus more on the rod because I want lightweight, I want sensitivity, I want to make sure that it balances well. But if it is a spinning setup, I think the reel makes a little more sense. Not to say that the rod doesn't matter, but I would focus more on the reel.
Okay, interesting. Now, why would you focus more on the reel for the spinning setup as opposed, why that over the bait caster? As over the bait caster, you're more worried about the rod, and the spinning reel setup, you're more worried about focus on the spinning reel. Why is that?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
I just think, and maybe this is me just being, I guess, bullish. I think when you're looking at a bait casting reel, I think the most important things are making sure that it reels in line well, and it's not going to fail you. Obviously, as you get more and more comfortable throwing a bait casting reel, you should be able to control your backlash and that sort of stuff. So I care more that I can feel bites. I can detect what the bottom is. I can, understand, or I have the backbone to pull fish out of vegetation if I need to. I have the amount of bend that I need to if it's a crankbait, and I've got light wire treble hooks, so I don't want the fish to, pull hooks out of their mouth if my rod's too stiff. I'm more I'm more concerned about that with a bait casting setup, because to me, a bait caster, what it does, I just needed to cast well, and I need to be able to reel in line. With a spinning rod, obviously the rod is very important too. I think it's more of a 50-50 balance with a spinning rod. The rod is almost as equally as important as the drag, but I think I can get away having a nicer spinning reel on a not as nice rod. I can get away doing that, and with a bait caster, I can get away with a nicer rod and a bad reel, if that makes sense.
Got you. That makes a lot of sense. Got you.
Now, I had a quick question for Trevor. Now, when it comes to bait casters, I'm wondering, are you like a DC type of guy? Because, for instance, I had a Shimano SLX DC, and if you're going to go from a SLX to a DC, you're literally talking about twice the price. You're talking about $100 reel to a $200 reel. I used that DC reel for a while, and I didn't find that much of a difference between the DC and a regular bait casting reel. I thought it might be more beneficial just to spend a few more dollars on, like, say, a Daiwa Tatula, at about $160 or maybe $170 if you can find it, depending on the price, whatever you can find on sale. I just felt the DC, I was still getting backlashes with it the same I would be with a regular non-DC reel. I was just curious if you use them yourself, if you recommend them or what.
Yeah. So I'm biased. I'm a big Daiwa simp. I love my Tatulas. To that point, the SV spool is great when it comes to mitigating backlash. The DCs are awesome. Like I said, I have nothing bad to say about the DCs. I got tons of friends that are, Shimano for life, and they swear by the DCs. But I think, like I said, once you get comfortable enough throwing a bait caster, I don't think you necessarily need to rely on DC technology or even SV technology to help you prevent backlash. But is it worth it? I think it is if you're somewhat of a newer angler that's wanting to learn how to skip, wanting to learn how to throw into the wind, cast into the wind, that sort of stuff. But I think a lot of reels nowadays are good enough that if you can set your brakes right, you can set your line spool tension just right, and obviously use your thumb a little bit, you can still get away without having DC technology or SV technology. I've got a buddy who uses no brakes, no spool tension, and he controls everything with his thumb. And I can't do that. But that's how he knows how to fish, and that's how he does it. And I remember I picked up his rod one time on his boat. I was like, hey, let me check this thing out. So I picked it up, I fired it, and I was under the impression that it was going to have brakes on it, and that thing just like over spooled. And he's like, well, thanks, man. That one's done for the day. But I think it's to each his own. I think it's helpful for certain scenarios, and like I said, with newer anglers that are learning to cast a bait caster, I think that definitely lessens the curve. But I don't think it's a must-have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I seen a comment in the chat, and it's from Michigan Fishing. He said the base SLX equals the GOAT, and I will second that, because that is the best $100 bait caster I've ever thrown, and there's no brake adjustment. It's just drag and spool tension. And I've had DCs, I've had other brands of bait casters, but that Shimano SLX, I think I got the 150 HG is the one I got, or the ones I use. Because I know there's a couple different models. I want to say off the top of my head, it's the 150 HG. But I'm a snob for those. That's the only bait caster I'm going to buy for bass fishing. And then I'm a snob for, I use Daiwa spinning reels. I use the Legalist 2000 series. That's like my all-around go-to.
That to me is the best spinning reel under $100, and I don't think it even comes close.
Everybody, I get a lot of questions, and I know people really rave about the Pfluger President. And I said, dude, I've been using the Daiwa Legalist for years now, and it's like bulletproof.
Mm-hmm.
And the drag is phenomenal. It's lightweight. It's because when you got a spinning reel in your hand, you're doing, especially on like St. Clair, you're doing a lot of just this all day long, reel a little bit, and you're just kind of hopping the bottom, you know, whether it's with the tube or a spark shad or whatever you're throwing out there. So to have the strength and capability of that reel, but being lightweight is what sold me on it. When I bought my first one, I was like, dude, this thing is sweet. And since I think I've got 6 of those. It's the Legalist, you know, because they got the whole series, right? But I get the 2000 series, so that's the size I get. No, but that's Shimano, just the plain SLX, not the DC, just a straight up SLX. I think it's $99, and there is no, and I don't understand the reasoning behind it or the methodology why there is no brake, or maybe there is some type of brake system. I never really looked at it, but I like the fact that I don't have to adjust that. I just adjust spool tension, and I'm good to go.
I didn't know that about that. I ain't gonna lie, I've been using Shimano for a little bit, and I've liked that, but I'm starting to look towards those Daiwas. So yeah, we'll see. They're a little more expensive depending on the ones you're looking at. So, and if you do it, you gotta do it right. So you gotta do it with the right rod and all that. So, you know, just doing my homework right now. But
I actually just purchased, not just purchased, but a couple months ago, I got the Daiwa Tatula based off a recommendation from a friend who also has a channel, Shane Flynn Outdoors. He said, you got to get the Tatula 100. And so I picked it up. We haven't had the weather to use it yet. So as soon as we get a little bit warmer weather out here, that's going to be one of the first reels I try out. So I'm really looking forward to it.
That's awesome that you know Shane. He's a super cool guy. I got to know him a little bit this past year too.
Yep. Yeah, I believe he's kind of on board with Omnia as well right now. So, yep. Cool. And he shot me a text message while I was doing this. I believe he's watching through your channel right now, Trevor. So
sweet, awesome.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. So I do have another question here, and I think this one's probably one of the most important questions: is left-handed or right-handed retrieve for baitcaster? and why do they have right-handed retrieve on baitcasters, but like left-handed is standard for spinning reels?
And real quick, before we get into this question too, because you see a lot of like pros, depending on who they are and what they're doing, they'll use like the spinning rod, you know, left-handed or whatever, and then they'll switch and they'll use their baitcaster and they'll baitcast with one hand, and then they'll switch to. It's like so. What's supposed to be the right or the wrong? What's going on with that? Like, why is there a right-handed? Why is that?
Yeah. I tell people, if you're reeling your spinning rod with your right hand, that's wrong. But you know, I don't think there's a right way to do it. I don't think there's a wrong way to do it. I reel a spinning rod or a spinning reel with my left, and I use a right-handed baitcaster.
See, you're one of those guys.
Yep.
When you cast it, let me ask you something. Do you cast it with your left hand on the bottom and your right hand on the reel, and then you got to switch hands?
I can do both. It kind of depends, because if I'm in a situation where I need to, if let's just say I'm facing forward and my target is on my right side, and I need to skip this way or do that, I can control it with I can control my reel with my thumb in my left hand. But if you're telling me that I'm going to bomb a cast as far as I can, I'm definitely going right hand on top, left hand on bottom, and slinging it. But the reasoning behind why I did that is when I was a kid and I was first learning how to use a baitcaster, best fisherman in the world was Kevin Van Dam, and he fished right-handed, so that's why I fish right-handed.
That's pretty good. It's a tough answer. It's tough to debate that answer at all.
Yep.
KVD's the best.
Mm-hmm. So, and I'm the same way. You know, I actually taught myself, because I bait cast, I reel with my right hand, but I taught myself to cast, because I thought it was funny. Like, I would cast, or I'd watch all these guys cast, and then they always got to switch hands, and I'm like, well, I'm just going to do it like this. That way I can keep so I can comfortably do that. But if I want to load up and power cast, I just envision, you know, you think of Babe Ruth getting ready to hit a home run, right? He's got the bat back and he rears and just launches it. So if I'm swinging a baseball bat, my left hand's at the bottom, my right hand's at the top, which is on the bait caster, and I just rear back and let her eat, right? So same thing. I I feel like if I need to get really accurate, I can backhand better with my bait caster in my left hand, just one-handed it, than I can my right. Because my left hand's a little more, I write with my left, I eat with my left, but my right is my powerful hand. So it's just kind of ambidextrous, but if I need to launch one, yeah, I'm gonna like I'm hitting a baseball, right?
It's funny because for like certain scenarios, like all right, so I like to use left-handed bait casters for the most part, and I like to use a bait caster for like crankbaiting, chatterbait, spinner bait, things like that. If it's a big enough swim bait, heavy enough, I'll use that. But yeah, I actually like to use a right-handed bait caster for whopper plopper, and I've been trying to get it down packed with the right-handed on the frog, bait casting with the frog, and trying to keep it consistent between so I don't have to use two different rods. But yeah, that's the one I'll give the one funny little weird thing I do is I do like to use some of those top waters like that with the right-handed bait casters. I do have two sticking around that I use, but it was mainly because I purchased those two without knowing about what was going on with the bait casters and got them in hand, and I was like, oh, this is weird. That's when I realized, okay, maybe I need to go left. Mm-hmm. So went left for the most part, and then had an experience with the whopper plopper because of the rod I was using. So at the time, I wanted to use that kind of rod to get my hook set right. And it was the most optimal rod for the top water scenario I was working with. So that's what I ended up using. And I liked the control that I had with my stronger arm, which is my left arm since I'm left dominant. But yeah, that's one of the weird things I will admit I do. So.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I when I was working at a fishing tackle retailer, more of a brick and mortar store, people would come in, they're like, hey, I'm looking to buy my first bait caster set up, can you point me to one? And the first question you ask, are you right-handed or left-handed? And they're like, I don't know. And the way I would figure out is I would just say, set the hook for me one time. And if they were left-handed, they would always, their right hand would be out and they would turn to the left, counterclockwise. If they were right-handed, they would hold the rod with their left hand and they would turn, to the right clockwise. So that was what I would always instruct people. If you are going to go and learn how to throw a bait caster, now that they make left-handed ones, now that they make right-handed ones, just go with what you're comfortable with, so that you're not sitting there making awkward hook sets because it's on the opposite. You're reeling with the opposite hand that you're used to. So.
Yeah, and I felt like when I first got into bait casters, I almost felt like I had to get out of my comfort zone. Like I was doing something wrong if I was using a left-handed retrieve because everyone else had a right-handed. And thankfully, I decided to not listen to that. And I can't. I tried it and for the life of me, I just couldn't get used to that right-handed. Like I do this weird pumping thing with the rod because I just can't make it work.
Yeah, I'm the same way. If you put a right-handed spinning reel in my hand, I don't know what I'm doing anymore.
Yeah, I'm the same way, Jay, because when I did flip on my kayak that one time when I was with Lucas, he gave me his, one of his reels, and he had, where you had to spin it with the right hand. And I just could not. I mean, even though I only fished with it for about an hour, I could not reel that with my right hand. It just, something wasn't right with my brain. So when I get my bait casters, I always get, even though you see all the right-handers using the left-hand retrieve, even though you see all the right-handers using right-hand retrieve, I just can't do that. I keep everything the same. My spinning gear is my left, my bait caster is my left. That's more comfortable, and I just can't get my brain to do it any other way. That's just me, though.
Yeah, I do what's most comfortable.
Well, and that's Darius's comment right there. It says, I think it's weird guys can set the hook with their least dominant hand arm, and that's exactly what I do. My left arm is my least dominant, but but when it comes to jacking a smallmouth, I mean, that smallmouth's going to feel it. It doesn't know it's my least dominant, but I'm telling you right now, I'm setting a hook.
You're right, man.
I'm setting the hook. I mean, there ain't nothing better than a smallmouth. Like, you're crawling the bottom, and then all of a sudden just, you're feeling the rocks, and all of a sudden dunk, 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 and it's like, all right.
Yeah. Bam. Yeah.
But that's
Yeah.
me. That's my least dominant is my left. But, it is what it is. And honestly, and I fished out of boats my whole life. And since I got into kayak fishing, I go, I have my kayak set up to where my live scope's on my left, my graph's on my left, everything I'm looking at to my left. And I only cast to my left because I need to load up to my right if I'm going to set the hook. And I always, not always, but I'm trying to bring the fish around to my right side because I don't want to switch hands to net it. Because when you're in a kayak, you're there's only so much space and there's a lot going on sometimes. So
you gotta keep it consistent.
And I don't use a long-handled net. I think it's more of for me it's more of a hazard because now I'm reaching way out there and I feel like I've knocked more fish off doing that. So I keep them right tight to the kayak. I bring them right here, and I just got one of the little short-handled floating nets, and I keep them right there. But I have to swing them around the front. And then to get them there, you know what I mean? I will. The only time I bring them in on my left side is I boat flip them in, because if he ain't coming around, then he gets flipped in. But otherwise, I'll work them right around the front of the boat, and right here. But that's how I got it all set up. Is that because I always cast to my left, and then in front of me a little bit sometimes, but majority everything to my left. Even though I'm casting with my right, the rod goes directly in my left hand. And then it's just, I don't know.
You set the hook like Christine Fisher, bro. Every time she sets the hook, I feel like she's gonna flip out of the kayak, but she puts everything into that thing. Every hook set's the same, bro. No chance.
I set the hook on a log today, and it moved a little bit, and I was like, when I set the hook, I was like giant, but then it didn't move, but then it budged a little bit, and I was like, okay, yeah, that's a snag. But now, and I was out, man. The water temp was 36 degrees. Wasn't really expecting much, but I was on a full-blown. I was the only one out there on Lake St. Clair, and I was in a kayak. So I was on a full-blown prospecting mission looking to get a big, fat 6-pounder, right? Because this is the time to get them.
Yeah, that's true.
It's funny you talk about that log. There's nothing that feels more like a fish.
Yeah.
That's not a fish than fishing line. Have you ever set the hook on fishing line? Because
because it gives you a little bit of a tug. And
yeah.
You're
Because when you set that hook, you get that little tension. It's that stretch that comes back, and it's like, oh, there he is, And then, half the time, it's like this long strand of line, and your hook is like slowly working down it, and it's like,
that's true.
Oh, he's coming.
Right, you're right.
And then there are no head shakes.
And then, you have to leave your rod tip alone for a second to see.
Yeah. Yeah, you do that. You do that hook set, and then you kind of look up to see if it's coming or not.
You see, you're like, snag.
Yeah,
that or a good bouncy branch too. You know what I mean? Some good underbrush, man. I hate those too because
dock chains. Oh man,
those will make you think. Oh, I hate the twigs that are soft and malleable enough that you go through an area 2 or 3 times because you swore you got a bite. But you're not sure, so now you got to start really feeling for it, and you feel for it, and it's more consistent. You're like, it's some structure.
Yeah.
That's that 3-pounder.
Yeah, that's that 3-pounder.
So Jay, there was a question here, and maybe all of us can touch on it, or if you want to or not. But where was it? What's the most common mistake with a bait caster? And I'm going to say right up front, I think. My opinion on that would be the most common mistake is just taking it out to the water and fishing with it. I think the way I learned to use a bait caster was I spooled it, and then all I did was put a sinker. I tied a sinker on, and I put a 5-gallon bucket out in the yard, and I just learned the feel of it, right? Like I would flip it out there. I'd side hand cast. I'd overhand cast, but get like a 1/2 ounce or a 1/4 ounce sinker, something with a little bit of weight, but not too much. Get it out in your yard or an open area and learn it there, because the last place you want to learn to fish with a bait caster is crunch time when you're on the water. And I mean, we all have free time where we're sitting around scrolling on our phones or doing whatever else. That's prime opportunity. If the weather's nice, you step outside for 10, 15 minutes. And that would be my thing as far as the most common mistake is trying to learn it on the water.
They actually have small I think Eagle Claw makes them. They're like they're yellow, and
Yeah,
they're like
those little rubber
rectangular.
weights.
Yep, and they're rubber weights, and those are good because they bounce. Because I will tell you, it does feel different when your bait caster is landing in the water, as opposed to landing on the ground, because it's almost like when it lands on the water, there's a little bit of give. As where when it lands on the ground, it's like that's kind of it. So you really do get a fast learning curve as far as how to thumb on dry land. So that's just something to consider. But definitely look into a few videos and watch a few of those as far as like learning on how to do a bait caster, and like, you know, to Lucas's point, just practice a little bit. The rubber ones will help a little bit, like I said, with that land scenario because of the bounce. It'll kind of move along kind of similar to how it would in the water, but it is a little different.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I'll add for mistakes that I see a lot, and there's a lot of questions about it, is if you get too cheap of a bait caster. Now, and we could talk about like prices on reels, because I think that's a legitimate concern or a question. But if you get, it's just like with a fishing kayak. If you get too cheap of a reel, bait casting reel, you're gonna ruin the experience, because you're not gonna like, I get the sentiment of someone doesn't want to go all in case they don't like it, but then you cheap yourself out of the experience of a decent bait caster.
That's very true.
Yep.
Yeah, I see a lot of people do that, and they'll get, you know, whatever cheap secondhand you know, bait caster, and then they regret it, and they just don't go back to a bait caster because it was a pain in the butt for them.
Yeah, especially when you have a braking system that has 1, 3, 6, 9, you know, rather than those micro adjustments for those braking systems. I'd say, you know, the first thing that came to mind when you're talking about mistakes that, you know, you use when you're learning how to use a bait caster is tightening up the brakes way too much. Because if you do that, then you never learn how to really thumb it yourself. But it also doesn't give you a true representation of what casting a bait caster is going to be like. I think everybody's going to have to go through pulling out backlash. It's just part of the game. And then also another thing I would say is you cannot cast a bait caster the same way you cast a spinning rod. And what I mean by that is, you know, when you cast a spinning rod, your release point is here, you know, here. When you cast a bait caster, your release point is here, but then you have a follow through as well. Whereas with a spinning rod, you know, you can cast end here and just keep your rod tip there. You don't have to necessarily follow through all the way with a cast with a spinning rod.
Yeah. That's good.
Follow through like a basketball shot.
Yeah, because I remember my dad, you know, he's notorious for wanting to throw a spinning rod his whole life. And I told him, you know, there's some things you need to throw a bait caster with, like if you're flipping a jig or you're frogging or something like that. And the thing that he would do is he would cast and he would fire and he would stop here. And because he stops there, the spool always just overruns. But if he would just follow through with the cast, you know, that rod tip goes with the motion. You know, you end up pointing your rod kind of where your cast is going to land. That just helps you, you know, mitigate that backlash a ton.
Oh, wow. Cool. Great tip.
Sounds good. So any final thoughts? We're going to start wrapping up here soon in a bit. Trevor, anything that you feel like we didn't maybe touch on when it comes to reels or getting started with certain reels?
I don't know. Like I said, I think, you know, everybody has a stigma towards spinning reels, and, you know, you're less of a fisherman if you're throwing spinning reels. But I think, you know, spinning reels are starting to come back. Obviously, you see some really nice ones that are, you know, just unbelievable. They're super smooth, great drags, everything like that. But yeah, I mean, do whatever's comfortable for you, whether that's a spinning reel or a bait casting reel. But yeah, I think the more you can mess around, obviously time in the water, just casting and doing all that stuff, the more comfortable you'll be with it all. So I don't think, apart from that, I feel like we covered quite a bit. There's a lot of little nuanced stuff that you can get into in terms of like balancing a rod on a reel and that sort of stuff. Reel handles and big knobs, small knobs, all that sort of stuff. But I think a lot of that is just aesthetics and just kind of personal preference at that point.
Yeah. Guys, any other questions about reels?
Oh, actually, I do have one.
Okay.
When you spool up your line with braid, make sure you put backing on your spool. If you guys aren't familiar with backing, essentially you need to either put electrical tape so that the braid has something to bite onto when you're tightening it up on your spool. Because if you think about braid, it's smooth. If you've got it on a metal spool, with metal finish, you're going to end up, that entire spool of line is just going to turn when you set the hook. So you're not gonna get that. You're going to set the hook and feel like your drag just completely slipped on you, when actuality, the whole spool line is spinning on your rotating on your spool. So you
Now,
can
is
do
that
that.
Use backing.
Now, is that just for spinning rods, or because a lot of bait casters have the holes on the spool that you can actually tie the knot to? So do you need to do that on those type of bait casters, or are you mainly talking on spinning reels?
Mainly on spinning reels, but if your bait caster doesn't have a hole in the spool that you tie to, then you 100% need backing as well.
Okay.
Yep.
So that was a video by Kevin Van Dam I watched a couple of years ago. He did like a tips and tricks thing where, because a lot of guys will load their spool right down with braid, and when they go to change line, like it's not as cost effective as loading your spool with backing. And then, because I've always used backing on spinning reels and bait casters. But I like to load the spool at least halfway with, or a third, let's say. That way I'm not, because the braid's the expensive part. Your backing can be, some trilene big game 20-pound test or whatever is going to fit on there the best. But I never change my backing, and the amount of braid I have to change is not a lot because of all the backing I put on there. So I usually buy like a 500-foot spool of 15-pound Power Pro, and that usually lasts me quite a while.
Yep, good point.
But I did see a question. Said, how do you go about choosing your spinning reel size?
Yeah, I think, at least for a lot of us northern guys, at least here in Minnesota, we've noticed a trend going towards larger spinning reels. And the reason, so I use a 3000. I don't use anything smaller than a 3000. The reasoning behind that is with the 3000, you get a bigger spool, you get a bigger drag disc. One, the bigger spool allows your casts to go further. Obviously, you think about the radius of the spool and the line coming off that circular spool. With a bigger radius, it's going to come out smoother. One, two, you have better line capacity. Three, you have a smoother drag. Like I said, with a bigger drag disc, those fish they can just pull real nice and smooth. And yeah, you're seeing guys. We have guys up here that are notorious for only throwing 4000s, and that's what 6-pound test, 8-pound test.
Wow.
And you don't have to. You don't to that point of putting on a ton of backing. You don't need to have 600 yards of 8-pound test on your spool. That's pointless. So fill it up halfway with mono or something like that, and then just coat the rest of it with your braid, because it's going to last forever.
Yeah, and then when you change your line out, you're only changing half of your spool. You're not changing 300-400 feet of braid at maybe 150, 200 feet or whatever.
Correct. Yep.
I got a question quick. So when spooling your, let's say, okay, so if I'm spooling up a spinning rod, depending on what I'm doing now I've went to the point where I'm spooling it up with braid, and then I have a leader on there, right? And now I'll do this sometimes with my bait cast setup. Is that recommended on both? Now, obviously with the bait cast setup, I have to have it so where it's not coming in the line or not coming in the spool, even when I'm ready to make my cast and I spool up to make my cast. So there has to be, some measurement control there. But, I also know, like, Kevin Van Dam swears that, he'll fill up a whole spool of a bait caster with fluoro. So what's better? What should be done? Is what I'm doing with the baitcaster a no, or should it only be done on a spinning rod? What's the deal with that?
Yeah. So it's kind of a two-part approach. When you're talking spinning reels, I always advocate for braided main line, so a spooled braid. The reasoning behind that, like I said, if you have a big spool, like a 4,000 size or a 3,000 size, you can fill it up halfway with mono so that you're not using up a ton of money on your braid. But the thing with braid is there's no stretch, more sensitivity, less line twist. You will get wind knots, but wind knots are manageable, especially if you make sure that your line is tight before you start reeling. Better casting distance. In addition to that, if it's a windy day and you've got braided line out there, braided line floats. So I like to use a high vis line. So if I get a bite, but I don't feel it, I can see, my bright blue line or my yellow line swimming off. With fluorocarbon, straight fluorocarbon, it's going to be much more difficult to see that. Obviously, you have stretch with fluorocarbon, so you're not going to, you're going to have less sensitivity than you would with braid. It's got line memory. So if you've ever pulled out a spool of fluorocarbon, that thing coils up like one of those old cord phones. And so, you're going to lose casting distance on it. I just think it all makes a lot more sense to go braid, especially with a spinning rod or a spinning reel. When you're talking a bait caster, you're starting to see guys use braided line and then to a fluorocarbon leader. The only challenge with that, like you said, is if you're using heavy line, you're going to have a big kind of a thick knot as it's coming through the guide, that leader knot. So one thing you could do to mitigate that is use like an FG knot, super thin, but still it's going to clink through your guides as you're reeling it in. But with braided line, you can save on not having to spend a ton of money on a whole 100-yard spool line for every reel. You can reuse the braid numerous times if you're just going to tie a leader on, but then it comes with the, just the annoying part of having to retie leaders over and over and over again. But yeah, I mean, pros and cons. I don't think there's any right way, wrong way to do it. I would say that I am more heavily, I have a stronger opinion about using braided line with a spinning reel than I do with a bait caster. I think, all my jerk bait, my crankbait, my chatterbait, all that sort of stuff, my jig, I throw straight fluoro on my bait caster, all the way down to the spool, all the way down to the bottom of the spool. But I do know some guys that throw braid to a fluorocarbon leader, and I think it works just fine. It's just that you're going to hear the knot clink through the guides. But once you get to like the really high end rods, like your Steezes, Daiwa Steezes, they have what are called AGS guides, which are very, very lightweight, sensitive guides. But the problem is when you have a leader knot going through those guides when you're casting, you can shatter those guides. They're very fragile, but they're super sensitive. But you can make a cast, and if that leader knot comes out of your spool and it clicks those guides too hard, it'll just shatter your guides completely. So they specifically write on the manual to not tie your leader knot too far down.
Okay, wow.
I've always been a braid to leader on all setups, but I recently adopted and went back to on all my bait casters are straight fluorocarbon. Mainly because I got sick of tying leader knots on them. Like I have no issue casting the leader knot. I just tie the Alberto and I can cast it through. I can run it up on my reel and cast it. Mm-hmm. But I get sick of eventually I'm not happy with the 3-foot leader I got left. I want a 8 or 10-foot leader. So now I got to cut it, retie it. So all my bait casters just went back to straight fluorocarbon. I'm happy with it so far. I mean, but I'm a type of person, I don't have very good feel in my hands. So that's why I like braided line, is because that I can feel everything. And especially like you were saying, Trevor, for being able to see it, I use that high vis yellow. It's the only braided line that I found that doesn't fade was the Power Pro. But that high vis yellow, but if I'm like skipping up under a dock or something, 95% of the time, I see my line move before I feel the bite because of that braided line.
Yep.
Cool.
Yeah, I think, whenever you're using braid, I don't see any reason to use like a low vis braid unless you're throwing a frog. or you're punching when that's just straight braid. But if you're throwing braid to a fluorocarbon leader, 1,000,000% it should always be some sort of high vis that you can see, because the fish is going to see, or hopefully not see, the leader. It's never going to have a chance to look at your braided line. So it doesn't matter what color it is.
Are you a leader? Do you use leader on top water? Because I've always been an advocate of I go straight braid on top water.
Yeah, it depends on the top water. If it's a frog,
Okay.
it's straight braid. If it's some sort of top water with a treble hook, I put a monofilament leader, because one, mono floats, and two, it has stretch, so that helps those hooks not pull out of the mouth.
See, my issue with the mono leader was I would get the line hung up on the front treble. So that's more so than just with straight braid. So that's why I pretty much every top water I just use straight braid. But I know unless I'm like musky fishing, then I'm using like 125-pound leader on the front anyways. But now you're talking holding the rod tip up and just keeping the bait on the surface. But anything, lighter duty, using a Pop Max or a Frog or stuff like that, I've always just gone straight braid and had pretty good luck with it. But I've had people ask me that question, and I'm like, I've never used, I have used mono and fluoro leaders, but it seems like I get my front treble hung up on that fluorocarbon or monofilament.
Yeah.
I know some guys use like those peg weights, like you would on a Texas rig, like especially if you're throwing like a dog walker, like they'll use like a thicker, like 30-pound line, coupled with one of those bob weight stoppers to kind of mitigate that hooking situation. And another one, I know in South Carolina, when I fish retention ponds out there, I'm kind of like punching a Texas rig up and down and dragging around. And so what I do there is I'll do a straight tie with a braid. And those first couple of feet, I'll just darken that up with a Sharpie or something like that. So that's a good trick too, to help conceal, because it's high vis other than that. So, well, it's white now. It used to be high vis. So to your point of, lines fading out. What'd you say? Power Pro was the non-faded line?
Yes. Yeah. I've yet to have I've used a few different styles of braid. I bought like neon green and it ends up turning white, and I can't see white that well. So the Power Pro, it might be I think it might be the Spectra. I have to look. But it's a high vis yellow. It's like straight yellow. And when I say it doesn't fade, like even right down to where I tie the knot, it's very, very lightly faded. But with anything else, after being soaked in the water, it seems like, it just turns back to its natural state.
Trevor, do you suggest any line for high vis?
Yeah, if I'm throwing it on a spinning rod, I generally like a 8-strand. So anything that's an 8-strand, I particularly use Daiwa J braid. I think it's a little slick, and the reason I like it is because when I tie my leader knots, I can get them really thin, and I feel that they cinch up very nicely with fluorocarbon. Power Pro, I've never had an issue with. I know guys love Suffix 832 as well, but yeah, there's a number of good options out there. But yeah, I think if you're going to use a spinning rod or a spinning reel, that it should be an 8-strand braid, and if it's on a bait caster, you can get away with like a 4-strand.
That Daiwa that J braid stuff is pretty. It's economically friendly. It's not too crazy expensive either. It's one thing I noticed. Yeah, for like 300 yards of it, it wasn't too bad of a price.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I like it a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
See, Brian's got jokes. Brian's got jokes.
He said, "My man Lucas can't feel with his hands or see the color white. Can you hear top water explosions, Lucas? Or are you the Helen Keller of fishing?"
Well, so just let me explain quick. I don't have great feel in my hands because I work on power lines for a living, and I wear these giant, thick rubber gloves over these hands, and like trying to work with little nuts and bolts and stuff. Like my arms fall asleep almost every night in bed because of it. But so that's part of it. Just nature of the trade.
Yeah. Well,
but yeah, that's why. But no, But no, I can definitely I can see just fine, but I can't see I can't see the color white when it's on the water. I mean, now 100-pound braid is different. I can see, that's like throwing a rope out there. You can see any color, it don't matter.
Yeah.
But when it comes to like 15 or 10-pound braid or even 30, seeing white is difficult.
I thought I'd throw a joke in there before you hit the dad joke, so I thought I'd transition in there.
Oh no, yeah, you're always razzing.
All right, that was a good segue.
There's a quick comment that says, I don't like J-braid on a bait caster. It's too limp. I will 100% agree with that. It's a very soft, supple line. So I think it's great on a spinning rod. I switched to a different, I use I was a samurai braid if I'm throwing something for like frogging or something like that.
Okay.
Do you like to use like a lot of guys like to use like a nice 7.2 heavy rod with like 60-pound, 65-pound braid? Does that sound like what you use
for frogging?
Yep.
Yeah, that's almost it's essentially the same. Mine's just it happens to be a 7'4" heavy rather than 7'2".
Gotcha.
Yep.
Yeah, I've got one topwater rod. It's 7.3 heavy with 65-pound braid, and that's whether I'm throwing a weightless fluke, a frog, whopper plopper. That new one by Z-Man, which is an awesome lure. I mean, I wrecked the Hellraiser, man. I wrecked them with that thing. And what's cool about it, I was using it with forward-facing sonar. That thing sinks. It will sink right to the bottom. But as soon as you start your retrieve, it goes like this, goes straight back up to the top. But it literally sinks right to the bottom.
It's cool.
Coolest thing ever.
No. All right, guys, let's get to the funny or crummy segment. We got a couple dad jokes here sent in. All right, so the first one is from Jason. So Trevor, the way it works is we'll read them, and then we have to decide if they're funny or crummy. All right. So Jason says, my dad is a prison guard and told me a story about a dwarf escaping from the 3rd floor. He said it was a little condescending.
Oh, jeez.
That was a good one. That was a funny one.
I like that one.
A little funny. Okay, it took me a second. Hang on, it took me a second. But yeah, that was funny.
All right.
Yes.
Sly Fox Fishing. I can't catch anything. I seem like a failure. And he followed up with it. He says, "Sorry, I told those bad jokes. Now I feel guilty."
Yeah, those are dad jokes for sure.
100%.
My daughter is only about 19 months, so I have not. I'm not well versed in my dad jokes yet, but
you'll get there.
You'll get there. Yeah.
Yeah, my daughter, she went from loving them to now she's like embarrassed when I start saying them. All right, Trevor Wagner said, "What did the fish say when it hit the wall?" Damn.
I've heard that one before. That was good.
Right. Anthony Laterno, why can't a pterodactyl go to the bath? Why can't you hear a pterodactyl go to the bathroom? Because the P is silent.
That's good. That's like that T on Tsunami, man. That's a sneaky little T, man.
This one's better spelled out because I never knew a pterodactyl had a P in there.
I didn't either. Is that true?
Yeah.
I think so.
I don't think I've ever. That's.
I tried it on my phone and autocorrected to the P.
Really?
Yeah.
Absolute source of truth. The phone.
There you go. Last one we got. So what'd the left eye say to the right eye? Between you and me, something smells.
That's good.
Oldie but a goodie. I know that one.
Yeah, no, that's some good ones, man. All right, Trevor. Anything else you want to add, man, before we wrap it up? Before we get out of here?
No, man. I appreciate you guys. This was a lot of fun. Good meeting Juan and Bryan. I like I said, Jay and Lucas. I know, so good meeting you guys and hanging out. Yeah, this was a ton of fun.
Yeah, for sure, man. Where can people follow you on your social medias?
Yeah, basically everything is just Trevor Low Fishing. That's Instagram, Facebook, small YouTube channel. I haven't done much. Hopefully we'll do some more. But yeah, and if there's anything Omnia related that you guys have questions on, feel free to reach out to me. Yeah, I can help with that too.
Okay, cool. No, and we appreciate having you on, man. So thank you. Hopefully we'll do this again because you dropped some bombs there. It was really good knowledge there.
Cool.
Yes. Jay, you don't have any good stories like 2 weeks ago?
Like what?
That's the story about the guy that bought the kayak.
Oh no. That's I don't got any more of those stories, man.
Okay.
Actually, I
Dude,
hit him up afterwards.
I was dying. Like I hadn't laughed that hard in a minute.
Yeah.
And then when Bryan chimed in on it, that had me rolling.
That was I don't know, man. That's gonna be like a once in a year probably type of story. I don't got no more like that.
All
right, guys. So real quick before we sign off, then just a reminder: next week we have 2 weeks from now we have the next show is March 17th at 8:00 at night, same time, same place. We're talking to Bearded Paddler about the worst kayaks, not the best kayaks, the worst. So the ones you want to avoid at all costs. We'll be talking about that, and he's a good source of information. Like I said, one of the best. Manages one of the biggest kayak retailers in the nation. And I also wanted to let you guys know, if you don't know already, we're giving away a $150 rod from Impulse Rods. So I'll put it in the comments below so you guys can see the giveaway that we're doing. And basically you have 7 or 8 different ways to sign up. And the winner, I mean, right now I think we have 160 something entries. So I mean, by the end of this, we might have 250. It's real easy to get in. It's basically just liking a couple profiles, submitting your email, stuff like that. But $150 rod from Impulse and some Bearded Dad Fishing swag. And besides that, man, just follow us on our socials. Obviously, we're on all different YouTube channels and Facebooks right now because we're streaming on Bearded Dad Fishing. We're streaming on Outdoor Conquest, Michigan Fisherman, Trevor Low. So if you guys don't have any of the other guys hooked up on social media, make sure you do that. And again, I appreciate you guys. Thank you again, Trevor. Thank you guys for joining in, and we'll do it again soon.
Sweet. Have a good night, guys.
See you guys.
Thanks,
All right.
Jay. See you.